you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
You're a stupid son of a bitch.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I can't hear you.
How about that?
There you go. Now
All
that's
right.
pretty good. I
So-
hope that not everything that you said in your opening monologue was critical, because I couldn't hear you.
Yes, everything that I said in the opening monologue was totally missing because, and even the really good part where I criticized my producer for not getting a few of the switches right initially, which of
That
course
happens.
would be me. So we'll go ahead and just kind of briefly let people know I am, excuse me, I'm your host, DL, and this is another episode of Friendly Fire with Mike Termat. He is running for the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. And
That's
as I was
exactly
saying,
right. It's wonderful to be with you today.
absolutely. And as I was saying, people, I'm going to dial it up a little bit, but we're not getting to the point of hostile. We're just dialing it up, kind of try to ask the tough questions. So let's get into it. Mike, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you at any hour of the day, but particularly at this hour. I'm glad you have a robust audience that likes to kick off their day right.
I'm doing my best. It's a lot of fun, and it kind of started out as being a dad and saying, you know what, everybody's pulling on me all day long. Let me go ahead and just get up super early. And then I was like, you know what, maybe I should do my podcast early in the morning. And
You got to get up early to beat the kids. I know what you mean, and I by that I don't mean beat the kids, but beat them out of bed and to get your day started. That's for sure.
Right.
I've been through the cycle a couple of times. I've raised 2 kids that are, of course, old enough to be out and about on their own now. How old are yours?
I have 1, and he is 4, and I think he's
That's
still
awesome.
presently sleeping. So we're doing pretty good there.
Excellent. All right, I'll hold it down.
All right. So let's get started. And by the way, if there are a couple people watching live, and so if they happen to have a question, I might toss that out to you as well. But let's just get right into it and let's figure things out. Why you? Why? And so let me preface this a little bit. I've kind of split my questions up into 2 major categories. I've got Libertarian Party members, and then I've got the general public. And the reason I did that is because the first and foremost thing that you need to do is get the buy-in from the Libertarian Party members. And so anybody that's watching that may not be familiar with this process, is very simple. At our national convention in 2024, the delegates that come from all 50 states will go out and they will vote on who they want to be their presidential nominee. So Mike Termat will be one of them, and there are several others. And so what is your pitch to the Libertarian delegates?
Well, thanks, DL. I appreciate that. My campaign is quite a bit different from the other campaigns that we have inside the Libertarian Party, past or present, to be honest. My campaign presents a combination of professionalism and credibility on the one hand, and on the other hand, the most transformative ideas. We're running on a platform that we call the Gold New Deal, which is a separately branded and has its own URL, its own website, as a matter of fact, that everyone can go visit at goldnewdeal.org. But we believe that it's very important to run a campaign that's based on policy, very forward, very purely libertarian policy, because we believe it's important to differentiate from the other parties and give American voters a real alternative choice. Most people, we believe, in the United States have libertarian leanings. You just got to give them an opportunity to find you, identify with you, recognize the libertarianism, not only in our campaign, but in each voter, to find common ground with those voters. But we believe that in the past, campaigns have done this wrong. Libertarian campaigns have done this wrong. They have sought to find common ground with Democratic and Republican politicians instead of Democratic and Republican voters. And so we're taking a very, very different attitude toward that by differentiating just as hard and clearly as possible from anything that you'll hear from the other parties. And indeed, we believe that our solutions are so transformative that they're very different than what you'll hear from the other libertarian candidates as well. And of course, like I say, we combine that in a way that other campaigns, frankly, can't. In terms of our professionalism, we already have professional staff on board. In terms of my own commitment to public service and public policy, I've had 2 long careers in public service. I was a professional economist for a couple of decades. I worked for banks. I worked for agencies, government agencies, including federal and international agencies. I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I spent quite a few years in Washington as a free market advocate, mostly inside the financial services industry. I then had my own business in the industry of educating financial services professionals. That included online and published articles and a lot of conventions. A partner of mine and I did that for quite a few years. I taught economics at 3 different universities, a couple in Washington, well, one in Washington and a couple in Florida on a part-time basis before entering my second career in public service. I worked as a police officer for 11 and a half years on the road in Broward County. I worked for one of the municipalities down there, all as a libertarian. So as you might imagine, you get into some pretty interesting conversations and you find out that a lot of police officers, just like most Americans, have natural libertarian leanings. And so I'm a big advocate for police reform. I spent a lot of time talking about criminal justice reform in general, but I do believe that in addition to ending our nation's insanely counterproductive war on drugs, we also have a lot of work ahead of us in instituting profound, fundamental reform in how we manage law enforcement agencies.
Gotcha. So, that's interesting that you were kind of going through your background there, because I'm looking at your website and, it points out all the things that you did, that you've been to
Gold New
many
Deal or
countries.
MikeTremont.com.
MikeTremont.com. And
it.
it points out that you've traveled to, 35 countries. You've taught economics at 3 universities, like you were saying. You were involved in the Broward public school system, BS in aeronautical engineering, MBA from I can't even pronounce the
Rensselaer.
Rensselaer. Okay, you can tell who has been to college and who has not. And then degrees in economics from George Washington University as well. So let me ask: are you too smart to run for president? And
trust me, DL, I'm not that smart. We used to laugh in my family. My dad, who, as you might imagine, paid for my undergraduate school, used to say, if you were all that smart, maybe you wouldn't need all those graduate degrees. And we would laugh, because I think that that's thinking like an economist. There's probably some truth to that.
Right. And, because when I looked at that initially, my first thought was like, maybe he has developed talents through all this experience that would be better suited for somewhere else. Because it seems to me that, based on what we've seen in our history, politicians, particularly presidents, their best advantage is just telling the public what they want to hear. So they don't really deliver. And I can't remember the last time that I really felt good about a president based on their intellectual career, or the things that they've done in the past. It's either
Well,
I
it
like
is
it because of the
true
policy or not.
that there is no amount of education that's going to help anybody, a politician or anybody else, understand what it is that people, by and large, near and far, east and west, north and south, are feeling and thinking. You're absolutely right. That just doesn't happen. Look, I am a libertarian. I've been a libertarian for a long time. My solutions are extremely based on libertarian principles and policies, some of which are traditional libertarian bread and butter, and some are quite edgy and new, even by the standards of our party. And so it is true that not everyone is going to align with what it is that we're selling. There will be Democrats and Republicans that are so wed to their parties, so wed to what their parties have been feeding them for a long time, that we're not going to reach everybody. This campaign is designed to recognize that we're not in the business of reaching everybody. We're in the business of getting support from a third of voters. We believe that we need to make it to double digits in the polls early, which is, of course, what our party achieved in 2016 with Gary Johnson. But to hang on to that, because we plan on giving people a reason to hang on to us. I believe that the reason that Gary Johnson's campaign imploded was not because simply he forgot the name of a town in Syria, but because he had not done a good job of representing our principles and our positions in a way that gave people a reason to hang on to him when the inevitable hiccup came. You contrast that with Donald Trump. You brought up the idea that people are not comfortable with the candidate just because of their education or their experience. Donald Trump, of whom I am no fan, certainly demonstrated that you are right. This is a guy that does not rely on particular experience or education to represent what a lot of people are thinking and feeling. And he's the one who very famously said, I could probably shoot someone on Fifth Avenue without losing a lot of support. And that's because people knew exactly why they supported him or why they didn't support him, right? And that's what we need to do as libertarians, and what my campaign is doing specifically is giving people a reason to understand why they should support us. And if they don't, they don't, but we got to be who we are.
Gotcha. So I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. Maybe I misheard, but did you say that, excuse me, that police were natural libertarian leaning?
Well, not all of them, right?
Right,
You can't say that about any pool. But I did learn that a lot of police officers have natural libertarian leanings, in the sense that most, I don't have polling data to back this up, but I believe that most police officers are registered Republicans. But many have libertarian leanings, in the sense that, a couple of things. One is that people become police officers because they want to help. And helping in the criminal justice system means protecting people's rights. Most people become police officers because they want to protect your rights from other citizens, in the sense of fighting crime. But based on training and experience, you quickly learn that a big piece of your job is to protect people's rights, even from the government, right? That is a natural.
It doesn't seem to do a good job there, though.
What's that?
It doesn't seem that they do a good job there, at least from the libertarian perspective, right?
Well, no, that's not really true.
Kind of attitude, like there doesn't seem to be any challenge
majority of
of law.
police officers do an excellent job of protecting your rights. The problem, of course, is that there are a number who don't, and when they don't, that blows up spectacularly. And of course, that's why we as libertarians are upset, should be upset, and are upset that we don't do a better job of holding police officers accountable, controlling their behavior, but also incentivizing their behavior. A big part of my platform is to make police work more like other industries, where you impose market forces to create incentives for police officers to reach excellence in their business. As it is now, it's like teachers, where everyone gets paid the same, whether you do a good job or a crappy job.
Right.
And that's unnatural for any business.
I got you. Well, it's to me, it seems a bit of a hard sell because my experience with officers, my experience observing in the media is that they tend to fall in line with whatever the legislative body says. Like, hey, they said this, so therefore that's what I'm going to act on. And I think that's what gets, that brings about that whole ACAB, all cops are bastards that you see sometimes with people. And it's just, I think it's largely a result of officers doing two things or not doing two things, which is one, they seem to support whatever laws get passed. And there doesn't seem to be a huge I don't see where they're using their discretion to fall more on what I would see as protection from an overbearing government. And then number two, when officers do, like you said, there a handful of officers will do something very, very negative, and it basically blows up all over the place. But it's that thin blue line, right? Like there seems to be this protective nature of fellow officers, even when they actually did wrong, rather than saying, you know what, you're ruining our name, get the hell out.
That happens, not in every case, of course. There are plenty of cases where officers will hand over one of their own in egregious examples. But you're right, there is some of that. And that speaks to our need to do a better job of holding officers accountable. Unions, for example, do a marvelous job at protecting officers from accountability. We need to burn through that. I wish that it were as simple as local politicians need to do a better job negotiating with unions for the right to dismiss officers and discipline officers, to be more involved with discipline, as well as, and this is something I spent a lot of time talking about, retraining, training, and hiring, because I believe that we have profound improvements that we could make there. The problem is that politicians don't do a very good job of this, and most of them don't know how and don't even have an interest.
Right.
That's a huge problem. And to your point, the legislatures are the ones that are ultimately the bosses of police officers, and that's where we need to sunset all kinds of laws, especially, of course, ending this idea that there could be such thing as a victimless crime. That's the most insane basket of rules that has to go first. And I think that you would find that the vast majority of police officers support that idea. Well, so, bottom line, this is why I'm a big believer that we need to bring in a check to balance the system. From the outside, we need private sector intervention. And I believe the best, most effective, and ultimately most efficient way to do that is to replace qualified immunity for police officers. By the way, qualified immunity for all public employees, and impose a requirement for each officer to carry on his own or her own, and be responsible for the premiums on a private sector liability insurance policy. To be bonded, just like you expect your surgeon and other doctors to be bonded by malpractice insurance, we should have the same practice and policy inside of law enforcement. And I do believe that politicians need to negotiate for the right to pay officers differently according to their performance.
Right.
We don't want to be recruiting people who want to just hide behind the idea that I'm going to get paid whether I'm lazy or whether I do a great job.
Right. Okay. So let me challenge that a little bit and just see where you go with it. So you're saying, hey, what we need to do is we need to have officers more like, say, doctors who have malpractice insurance, and they're under like a body. So there's not really this union that's necessarily protecting them. But it has been the case for many, many years that the largest contributing factor for how do I say it? The largest cause of death was medical errors. So how do we know that switching the police over to something more akin to what we see with the with the medical community, that that wouldn't become the large, that wouldn't creep up and become the largest not contributing factor, but I'm losing my words here. But what I'm trying to get at is, how do we know that it won't replace it and say, okay, the largest cause of death is no longer medical errors, it's now policing errors?
I don't think bringing an outside check on our criminal justice system is going to increase the amount of violence in our system. I think it would decrease the amount of violence in our system. I do believe that our system is too heavy-handed, both in terms of legislated crime, what it is that we label as a crime, what it is that we prosecute, and what it is that we ask police officers to enforce, as well as the way that that enforcement is conducted. I believe that that is also too heavy-handed, in too many cases violent, in ways that don't need to be so. I believe that those are training issues, but they are also accountability issues. There are issues involved in hiring as well. And I believe a lot of this, look, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no such thing as a policy that's going to make every employee in any industry work exactly the way that you want them to. So if I make it sound like I've got a silver bullet here, let me correct myself right now. Sure. But I believe that we can move in the right direction. This is a long-term battle in the sense that it's a matter of police culture. We need the culture to move in the right direction, and it is going in the right direction. Even in the 11 years that I did the job, I saw improvement. I was lucky in the sense that I worked for a great agency where we didn't have very many behavioral problems inside the police department. We didn't have zero, but we had a much better department than other agencies that I saw geographically nearby, with whom we worked from time to time and interfaced, and of whom I was aware. So I was lucky, and the people in my community were lucky in that sense. We had a group that was dedicated to helping, as I believe that the vast majority of officers are in every agency around the United States. But we also had a group that was very much interested in protecting their community from stupidity. And sometimes that includes protecting them from the stupidity of the legislature. So I was lucky. But to your point, I don't think, while I don't think that we have, a magic wand here, I do believe that creating a greater check on the system will move that culture in the right direction in the long run.
Gotcha. Okay. So now we're still trying to appeal to the LP members. So let me ask you, this has been a bit of a debate within the libertarian community. And I think it's especially with the with the presidential and the vice presidential candidates is, the Libertarian Party, what is its purpose, and candidates by extension? Is it to deliver a messaging, or is it to engage in the political process? Because it seems like people are basically somewhat on one side or the other.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Look, we ultimately, the job is to change public policy. So the debate is, how do you get there? Can you get there just by messaging? Can you get there just by engaging in the political process? Does it have to be some combination of the two? Absolutely, it has to be some combination of the two. We need edgy messaging. We need activism. We need activists who are willing to go put the message out there, come hell or high water. So yeah, we need both. However, within the libertarian movement, within the liberty movement, most generally, we need both, and each organization needs to decide on its own what mix that should be. Within the libertarian movement, the Libertarian Party has to be the one organization that does a good job of engaging the political process. No other organization inside the liberty movement is going to do any of that. Activists are necessary. God bless them. I have been outside of school boards and at the beach and in the cities and in weird suburbs, and
Mhm.
I've done the door knocking, the conversations, the petition collections, the bullhorn on top of the scaffolding. I've been there and done that, and can attest to the fact that it is hard work, necessary work, and effective work. But the work of the Libertarian Party has to specifically include, and I believe needs to be focused on engaging in the political process, because nobody else will. The activist work, indeed, could go on outside of the Libertarian Party, but the Libertarian Party needs to focus on things like ballot access, needs to focus on participating in the process. And here's why. The process itself garners attention. The process itself will get a wake-up call to the media to cover this individual because this individual is participating in a race. It doesn't always work. Libertarians are frequently completely disregarded. Any of us who have participated in local races, I've run for Congress in the past, knows that it's very easy for media to dismiss you because you're not a Republican or a Democrat. That happens all the time. But to the extent to which you can get some of the media to pay some attention, we need to leverage that and take advantage of that. And participating in the political process is a big opportunity to do that in a way that goes in a different channel, in a different direction than merely activism, which has its own channel. And I believe that the same can be said for the national campaigns of our presidential nominees. It's a potentially very useful and potentially very large platform, and we need to take advantage of that.
Gotcha. So I've got a question here that's coming from the audience, and you've kind of sort of already answered it. So I want to kind of restructure it a little bit. And it goes along the line of activism and the political process. And the question comes from Mr. Rohrbach, and it says, do activists help or hinder the political process? And of course, it sounds like you said that they can help, but I think there's a lot of
help a
feeling
lot.
That they also
help a lot.
Right. Now, there's the feeling that they can also hinder it as well, which we've probably seen and could name. Is there a fine line? Can you define even somewhat a line between helping and hindering, like what that looks like? Or
well, there's a couple of different ways anybody can hinder, and that can be from an activist, or it can be from a politician. Anyone who represents our brand, whether it's the Libertarian Party or libertarianism more generally, or even the Liberty Movement, anyone who represents our brand can say something stupid, right? And stupid is as stupid does. You know, it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. But there are examples that fall into a couple of different buckets. One is you can say something really edgy and not back it up. That's a problem. Or you can say something that's just patently dumb. And look, no one is immune from that potentiality. You know, whether you're in the freedom movement or whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I would argue the Republicans and Democrats have a greater propensity to say, you know, just panderingly stupid things than we do. But I'm sure a Republican or a Democrat would give me an argument about that. So that's one way that it can be done. But I believe the more interesting example is when you lay out there something that is extraordinarily transformative by the standards of what it is that people are used to hearing, and not be able to back that up. That can be a problem for us. When, just to pick one example that I spend a lot of time talking about, I believe it's extremely important that we end the Federal Reserve System. Now, being a professional economist, I've spent a lot of time in and around the Federal Reserve System, interfacing with economists and regulators. I know the problems of the Fed. I know the reasons why it has to go. And I know how to get that done. It's a long-term project, but we absolutely need to sunset the Fed lock, stock, and barrel. And that means breaking it into its pieces, giving banks an option to opt out from the regulatory process, You've got to transfer the balance sheet to the Treasury Department to end these silly bailouts. You got to take away their discretion over monetary policy. And you've got to stop them from issuing new currency. Cryptocurrency that's coming this year is a real threat to the development of our economy. So that's just one little example where if you were to merely say, "End the Fed," and then someone were to say, "How come?" and you said, "Because I don't like it," you can imagine where we would actually be contributing to suggesting to people that we just have slogans and don't have an interest in backing it up. And therefore, perhaps we're given to say silly things. So that's just one example that may not be a perfect example.
Right.
But I do believe that we need to do a good job of backing up what we say. Gotcha.
Let's move on to general public. We talked a little bit about, the LP members and what they're looking for. And I want to kind of start off with this question that comes from that libertarian lady. We'll jump right onto this one. So it's a little bit of a long one. Mike, if you were president, how would you handle the growing group of Moms Demand Action who would love to have all guns off the streets, including guns owned by law-abiding citizens?
That's a scary thing, isn't it? Look, I came to libertarianism the way a lot of folks did, from one side or the other, and only later in life did I embrace both sides. And what I mean by that is, I grew up as an economist, very conservative, believing that the most important thing for us to do is to figure out policy that would keep the government from interfering in our economy, and therefore our economy would work better. We would be more efficient. Our incomes would grow. Our relationships with trade partners would improve, and everyone would be happy, healthy, and prosperous. All of which I still believe, but that's not enough. Later in life, perhaps 20 years ago, I began to be able to embrace what I would characterize as the other side of libertarianism, which is that even if, imagine some weird world, DL, where socialism works. Imagine that it were not true that a free market economy were the only way to most effectively allow an economy to run. Even if that were the case, I would argue from the other side of libertarianism that the government still does not have the authority to make decisions for you, that we all have the right to make decisions for ourselves, even if they're not very good ones. Both in terms of economic decisions, individuals and businesses, but also in terms of how we raise our kids, for example, or how we live our lives. And I think that thinking has to be applied to every debate, including this one. There are people who are more moved by the idea that the government just doesn't have the right to take away, well, anything, least of all your guns, being something that's protected by the Constitution, whether the government thinks it's a good idea or not, whether you think it's a good idea or not, whether someone else thinks it's a good idea or not. That's an important argument, and we need to be able to make that. But I would also add that the efficiency argument is important, and I believe that I'm more qualified than most to make this argument as a former police officer. And that is the following: gun control doesn't work. If we lived in an alternative universe where we had examples, even anecdotal examples, much less data, we don't have either. But if we lived in an alternative universe where we had information, research, data, statistics, anything that suggested that there was a form of gun control that worked in terms of reducing violence, at least we're having a conversation. At that point, at least we're having a debate, right?
Right.
But it's not the case. We're not having an interesting debate. There is nothing to suggest that any policy we could even imagine, much less institute, and this idea of going door to door and taking people's guns is just downright silly. Never mind the efficiency argument, the fact that it won't work. Never mind the rights argument, the fact that the government doesn't have the right. Think about the implementation.
Right.
We live in a culture in which people appreciate their constitutional rights. you're not going to lock, stock, and barrel take that away and violate people's rights just because you've decided. That's just not going to happen. So in this case, there's actually a third argument against such a silly idea. But I do think that as a practical matter, outside of the Libertarian Party, we need to make the case that it is absolutely untrue that some sort of gun control measure, whether that's eliminating the manufacture or distribution of a particular type of weapon, particular type of ammunition, is going to make any contribution to reducing violence at all. And remember that the vast majority of violence, and I don't mean like most of it, I mean almost all of it, in terms of guns, is not involving these mass shootings.
Right.
It's involved in crime in urban areas, most of which is spawned by the drug wars that are created by black markets, that is created by the drug prohibition. If we were to sunset the drug prohibition, the vast majority of gun crime would end. If you are really interested in reducing violence, I think most people are. There are some in the debate who are just disingenuous. But if you really are interested in that, we need to get rid of black markets, both in terms of immigration and in terms of drugs.
So if I'm a voter, and I just mean an average voter, not a libertarian voter, not a libertarian podcast host, or, you know, someone who chairs an affiliate. So I'm your regular everyday person that's not sitting around talking about this kind of stuff, you know, because I hear what you're saying. There's a complexity that's kind of sitting there. You know, you've got the drug war that's going on, and that's creating all these black markets and all these problems, which then, of course, leads people to say, well, we need this policy to deal with these problems. And then that leads to more policy, which leads to more policy, so on and so forth. So I'm your average voter. You've got like 30 seconds, maybe. How do you deliver that message so that people go, oh, there's something more? I mean, they don't have to get it, but how do we get them to the point where they start saying, maybe there is something more than what I've been hearing? And it feels to me like you got like 30 seconds to get that attention.
And sometimes you only do have 30 seconds. And look, the first 15 has to be I am not ceding ground in the debate about who is more pissed off about this. Nobody who can hear my voice has done CPR on more young men dying from drug overdose. I have raised 2 kids in public and private schools in urban areas. I know the problems. We need to do something about drugs, and we need to do something about violence. And I am convinced, having been a police officer for almost a dozen years, that our war on drugs and drug prohibition is absolutely counterproductive. It is a mental health problem and needs to be treated as such. Criminalizing it does nothing but create a black market that leads to violence. And by the way, if I thought that some weird form of gun control would make even an iota of contribution toward reducing violence, you would have my ear. I would engage you in a debate. But the truth is that there is no such thing. As much as we all wish it were true, we all wish it were so, that there would be some such thing as a public policy that would reduce gun violence. But there isn't. We need to change our culture and get rid of these black markets that incentivize the huge amount of violence we see in our urban areas.
Got it. So polls will often suggest that voters want a third party, but their voting habits kind of say otherwise. So why should non-libertarian voters care about a third party candidate like now or ever? But let's just go with now.
Well, now look, you don't even have a second choice now. You know, we're pretty much talking about a second party candidate from the Libertarian Party, because the Republicans and Democrats have almost merged together. If you believe in a politician who's going to tell you the truth about how awful war is, both in an ethical way and an efficiency way, you've got to look beyond the Republican and the Democratic parties. We are going to be running a stark, clear, crisp, loud anti-war message. That is a second option for Americans who I believe are ready to hear that. There is no such thing as an example of military intervention by the American government in the last generation that Americans would point to and say, that was a good idea. I'm glad we did that. As good as our military is at things tactical, our government stinks at things strategic. We do not advance American citizens' interests by our military interventions. Americans are waking up to that. They're ready to hear that. And they want another option. That's what we provide. And we need to remind people, we've been in double digits in the polls in the past. We can do it again. And once you're there, once you start getting some media attention, maybe we get into a debate. We don't know what the debates are going to look like in the next cycle. We don't even know if they'll exist, right? But things like debates, when you get to appear in certain, sometimes mainstream media and large alternative media outlets, you get your message out because you achieve something in the polls. That comes from demonstrating to people that they have a clear choice. You have to absolutely starkly differentiate your party, your views, your platform from those of the Republicans and the Democrats. If you believe in changing monetary policy, getting rid of inflation at an institutional level, don't tell me, oh, inflation's naughty, I wish we had less. Okay, that's what a Republican or a Democrat is going to tell you. If you want to do something about it at a real institutional level, you're really ready for a transformation, then you're talking about a libertarian. That's your only other option. In some ways, we are the second option from what you see as politicians in the game today.
Got it. All right, let's end on one final question. And I think this will be a great follow-up to the whole conversation that we've had. And that is, what is your biggest appeal to non-libertarian voters? And is it at odds with libertarian delegates who will, go on to vote for you or one of the other people as the nominee?
Well, I think as we just touched on, I think that the anti-war position is one of them. If I have an argument with libertarians, it is, to be honest, mostly with the other libertarian candidates, and so possibly with other libertarian delegates as well. I believe that there is a false dichotomy between seeking votes and putting out a really edgy message. I believe that the only way to get a significant amount of support and to hold on to it is to put out a starkly differentiated message. As I just mentioned, the idea of inflation. If your message is, as it was in 2016 from the Libertarian Party, we are fiscally conservative like Republicans and socially liberal like Democrats, don't even bother. Don't run. If that's your message, don't run. We should not be in the business of defining ourselves in the context of other politicians or other parties. We have to have our own message. We are anti-war. We are pro-institutional level change, both in terms of monetary policy and in terms of fiscal policy. Our government is on a railroad track headed toward bankruptcy well before the end of this century. If we want to save it, we need to make changes now. As a former White House economist, as someone who spent a lot of time inside the Office of Management and Budget, I know how to get that done. I know the budget control law that we need to institute because, as Milton Friedman said a generation ago, whether you believe in taxes or inflation, where it all starts is the government spending too much. We need to reduce the size and scope of government. Nobody else is going to be saying that. We need to be saying that, and clearly and loudly. Our job is not to seek common ground with other politicians. Our job is to be different, to differentiate ourselves and allow people with a libertarian leaning to find us and hold on to us.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on so early in the morning. Hope hope it wasn't too much, too challenging for you this early. I mean,
Not
think
at
it's
all.
like
I love
7:30.
this time of day, of course. And DL, to tell you just how important I think you and your podcast are, and that is the absolute truth. And your listeners and viewers may not know that you and I have spent some significant time together in the
Mhm.
past. Your show is so important. I stayed up all night last night just to be ready for this morning to make sure I didn't oversleep. I sat here at my desk, at my computer all night, just waiting for you. That's my commitment to you and your audience.
Oh, so I'm making the candidates insomniacs. I don't, I'm not sure how to feel about that. I'll have to think about that one for a minute. But I do appreciate you definitely being on so early. It was great. It was a pleasure having you. And I
My
hope the
pleasure.
questions weren't too tough, but also not too easy. And people feel free to let me know and be like, "Hey, DL, you were kind of weak, dial it up," or "Hey, DL, maybe take it down a
Well,
little
your
bit."
questions are not too difficult. You're right; they're not as easy as some others, but I think that those are the right questions. I mean, I think that you and I and your audience would agree these are the important questions. How are
Right.
we going to differentiate from the other parties? How do you differentiate from the other campaigns inside of our party? If we're not asking these questions, what are we doing?
Right. Well, a lot of it stems from just interacting with people. And I say, I remember going to events myself, not as a candidate, but as for the party and talking to everyday people. And a lot of them, a lot of my questions come from the conversations that I have
Sure.
with them,
Yeah.
and so I'm like, all right, well, apparently these are the ones that we need to answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the questions that I do hear from time to time with different candidates are not the questions. Those are questions that maybe libertarians want to hear,
Yeah.
or maybe a
Yeah.
small sliver of people, but not necessarily the public at large.
I think you're on point. I think you're on
So,
point.
but
Thank
all
you.
right. So go ahead and hang backstage real quick, and I will close out the show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in so early. It's been my pleasure to get up, get dressed, and hold this show, Friendly Fire, where I bring on candidates. Speaking of candidates, if you know a candidate or you are a candidate that is actively running, or you previously ran in last year's any election last year, that would be 2022, feel free to reach out. What I want to do on this show is I want to interview active candidates for the Libertarian Party only. So if you happen to be watching and you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, I appreciate you watching, but too bad. This show here is for libertarian candidates. And then also, if you ran last year, then I think it would be great to bring you on the show and have a retrospective, and we can talk about your campaign and how you feel it went and some of the things that you would have liked to have maybe have had, or in terms of support, not just simple stuff like, man, I would love to have more money. Of course we would. We want to talk about, how do we get candidates in the future to have better campaigns? And one of the ways that we do that is to bring them on and just simply have a retrospective and say, hey, what went well, what went terrible, and what kind of support, might you have really, what could you have really used to improve your campaign, or you're looking forward to the next campaign to improving. So reach out to me. You can find me, Liberty Dad, all one word, on Facebook, Liberty Dad Pod, on Twitter, where I probably spend most of my time, also way too much of my time. But reach out. It'll be great to have you. But for now, thank you for tuning in, and make sure to guard your liberty. Have a good one.